Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are cracking open the textbooks and zooming in literally on the microscopic world. We've got a high-yield stack of notes on Chapter 10 of Lippincott Illustrated Reviews, Microbiology, and this is going to be way more interesting than you might remember from bio class.
It's a really fascinating group of bacteria.
We are tackling the clinically significant gram-positive rods.
And before we even start, we should probably draw a bit of a boundary line. When you think of gram-positive rods, a lot of people, they immediately jump to clostridia.
Right, like tetanus or botulism.
Exactly, but we are explicitly excluding those today.
Yeah, those are the anaerobic bad boys reserved for Chapter 14. We're saving those for another day. Today, we're looking at a specific lineup of 3 major pathogens. So we've got Corynebacterium, diphtheriae, Bacillus anthracis, and Listeria monocytogenes. And we'll do a quick rapid-fire round on some others at the end.
And what's great about this trio, diphtheria, anthrax, and listeria, is that they really represent 3 completely different pathogenic strategies. You have diphtheria, which is, well, it's a master of toxin production.
Then you have anthrax,
which relies on these incredibly resilient spores to survive just about anything. And then you have listeria, which is a total stealth operator that literally hides inside your own cells.
So understanding these mechanisms isn't just, trivia for an exam.
Not at all. This is the difference between diagnosing a child with respiratory distress correctly, or, say, handling a potential bioterrorism scare safely, or even just knowing what advice to give a pregnant patient about their diet. They're like distinct biological personalities.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're starting with the toxin master itself, Corynebacterium diphtheria. Now, looking at figure 10.5 in the book, the first thing that jumps out is what these guys look like. It says they're pleomorphic, which I always just interpret as they can't decide on a shape.
That's a fair way to put it. They are small, slender rods, but they tend to club at the ends. The classic description you'll see is that they form clumps that look like Chinese characters or a picket fence.
A picket fence? How does that happen?
It's called a palisade arrangement. It's really all about how they divide. When the bacterial cells replicate, they kind of snap apart, but stay partially attached at an angle.
Oh, so it's not random.
Not at all.
Yeah.
They create these V and L shapes that look like writing or a fence. It's a very specific architectural signature.
And the notes mention a specific stained methylene blue that makes them look beaded.
Exactly. So these bacteria have this unique way of storing phosphate in little pockets called metachromatic granules. When you use that stain, the granules turn this reddish-purple color against the blue bacteria.
So you get this beaded or barred look.
And if you see that on a slide, your alarm bells should start ringing for diphtheria.
Okay, so we know what they look like, but they are pretty rare in the U.S. now, right?
Very rare in the U.S., thanks to vaccination. But globally, it's still a serious problem. It hangs out in the throat and nasopharynx of carriers and spreads through respiratory droplets.
A cough, a sneeze.
Yeah, even just talking can transmit it.
Okay, let's get into the nasty part, the pathogenesis. This is where it gets really interesting because this bacteria doesn't just invade you, it poisons you.
It absolutely does. Corynebacterium diphtheria produces what's called an AB exotoxin. It's a classic 2-part weapon you see in microbiology.
And I always remember B for binding.
That is exactly right. Subunit B binds to a specific receptor on the host cell. That binding then triggers the cell to just eat the toxin endocytosis.
So it's a Trojan horse.
The perfect Trojan horse. Once it's inside, the B subunit drops off and subunit A enters the cytoplasm to deliver the lethal blow.
And it's going after something very specific in our cell's machinery, right?
Very specific. Subunit A catalyzes a reaction that transfers a molecule, ADPR, from NAD+ to a protein called EF2. That's eukaryotic elongation factor 2.
And for those of us who haven't taken biochemistry in a while, why do we need EF2?
So think of your ribosome as a factory assembly line building proteins. EF2 is the motor that moves that line forward.
Okay.
When the toxin hits EF2 with that ADPR molecule, it just jams the motor. It completely shuts down protein synthesis. And if a cell can't make proteins, it can't maintain itself.
It just dies.
It dies, period.
Wow. So it's basically turning off the factory floor of the cell.
Precisely. And here's a fascinating little genetic detail. The bacteria itself doesn't inherently carry the code for this toxin. The gene is actually carried on a virus, a bacteriophage, that has integrated itself into the bacteria's DNA.
So only the bacteria that are infected with this specific virus can actually cause the disease.
Correct. It's a bit of a bad influence scenario. If the bacterium hasn't been infected by that phage, it's generally harmless. No phage, no toxin, no diphtheria.
And isn't there something about iron regulation here too?
Yes, and this is a crucial survival mechanism. The production of the toxin is regulated by iron levels. When iron is plentiful, a repressor binds to the gene and stops toxin production.
But when iron is low,
Like in the human throat, where our bodies try to hide iron from bacteria, the repressor falls off and the bacteria just starts pumping out toxin. It's attacking the host cells to release their iron so it can feed.
it kicks us when we're down. Okay, so the cells are dying in the throat. What does that actually look like in a patient? The notes mention something called a pseudomembrane.
This is the absolute hallmark of the disease. Because the toxin is killing all those mucosal cells, you get this buildup of dead cells, fibrin, bacteria. It forms a thick, gray, adherent coat over the throat and tonsils.
And the warning here is, in all caps, do not scrape out.
Right. It's not just sitting on top. It has grown into the tissue. If you try to scrape it off, it will bleed like crazy. And the scary part is that membrane can get so big it physically blocks the airway. That's why diphtheria was historically known as the strangler.
That is terrifying. The sources also mention bull neck, which sounds just awful.
It's massive cervical lymphadenopathy. The lymph nodes in the neck swell up so much that the neck looks as wide as the head. That's a sign of a very severe infection.
And the toxin doesn't just stay in the throat, does it?
No, and that's the real systemic danger. The toxin gets into the bloodstream and it loves two targets, the heart and the nerves. It can cause myocarditis, leading to heart failure, and also neuropathy.
What kind of neuropathy?
It often starts near the infection, so you get paralysis of the soft palate. Patients might regurgitate fluids through their nose or paralysis of the eye muscles.
So if a patient comes in with a gray throat and a bull neck, what's the lab doing?
First, clinical suspicion is everything. You start treatment before you even get lab results back, but for confirmation, we use a selective media called Tinsdale agar. It has tellurite in it.
And what does a positive result look like?
The Corynebacterium reduces the tellurite, so you get these very distinctive black colonies with a dark brown halo around them.
Very specific. So how do we treat it?
You have two goals, and you have to do them at the same time. One, kill the bacteria with antibiotics like erythromycin or penicillin. That stops more toxin from being made.
And two,
You have to neutralize the toxin that's already circulating in the blood, and antibiotics can't do that.
right.
For that, we use a horse serum antitoxin. It's basically antibodies from a horse that bind up the toxin.
Horse serum? That sounds pretty old school.
It is, but it works. The only catch is that because it's a foreign protein, you have to watch out for something called serum sickness about a week later.
But ideally, we just prevent this whole nightmare.
With the DTaP vaccine, it uses a toxoid, which is the toxin that's been treated so it's no longer toxic, but it still teaches your immune system what to look for.
So you're ready for it. Okay, that's the toxin master. Now let's pivot to the survivor, Bacillus anthracis.
This is a completely different beast. If Corynebacterium was small and fragile, Bacillus is a tank. It's a large spore-forming rod.
The visuals here are boxcars.
Yes, exactly. Under the microscope, they're large, blunt-ended rods that form these long chains. They look just like a train of boxcars. And on a culture plate, the colonies have these irregular swirling edges that people call a medusa head.
And unlike diphtheria, these guys have armor.
They do. They have a capsule, but it's a very weird one. Most bacterial capsules are made of sugars, polysaccharides. Bacillus anthracis has a capsule made of protein, specifically polyD-glutamic acid.
Does that make a difference to our immune system?
A huge difference. It's anti-phagocytic. Our immune cells have a really hard time grabbing onto it to eat it. It's like trying to grab a greased watermelon.
And then there are the toxins. Coral.
It's a trio. You have protective antigen, or PA. This is the key. It binds to the cell and forms a pore that lets the other two factors in.
And the other two are the weapons?
Right. You have edema factor, EF, and lethal factor, LF. Edema factor is an adenylate cyclase, which basically hijacks our cell signaling to raise CAMP levels.
And high CAMP in this context means
it causes massive fluid shifts. Water rushes out of the cells, leading to that characteristic swelling or edema.
and lethal factor.
LF is a protease. It literally chops up signaling pathways inside the cell that are essential for keeping it alive. It just causes tissue necrosis and cell death.
So PA lets them in, EF makes it swell, and LF kills the tissue.
You got it. It's a very coordinated attack.
Let's talk about how this actually shows up. I think most people remember the white powder scares, but there's a skin version too, right?
Cutaneous anthrax is actually 95% of natural cases. It usually happens to people working with animal hides or wool. Spores get into a small cut, and it starts as a bump, but then turns into this painless ulcer with a black center.
A black center.
It's called a black eschar. It's dead necrotic tissue. The word anthracis is actually Greek for coal, describing this black scab.
And then there's pulmonary anthrax, wool sorter's disease.
This is the much more dangerous form, the one you worry about with bioterrorism. If you inhale the spores, they get deep into your lungs. Macrophages pick them up and carry them to the lymph nodes in your chest.
And that's where they hatch.
Exactly. They germinate, burst out, and start pumping out toxins. This causes a hemorrhagic mediastinitis.
That sounds incredibly specific.
It is. It's very distinct. On a chest x-ray, the mediastinum, the center part of the chest, looks incredibly wide because it's just full of fluid and blood. If it's not treated immediately, the mortality is extremely high.
And because these are spores, they're just ridiculously hard to kill.
So hard to kill. Spores are basically bacterial bunkers. They can survive in soil for decades. They're resistant to heat, drying, chemicals. It's why they can be weaponized.
But we do have treatment.
We do. Ciprofloxacin or doxycycline are the go-to drugs. Penicillin resistance can occur, so we don't rely on it first.
All right, that's anthrax. Now for our third character. The intracellular sneak, Listeria monocytogenes.
Listeria is so fascinating because it just breaks all the rules. First of all, your refrigerator. Most bacteria stop growing at 4 degrees Celsius. Listeria loves it.
Which is terrifying for anyone who eats leftovers.
It's a huge food safety issue. It can grow in unpasteurized cheese, deli meats, coleslaw, things you keep cold. While everything else is dormant, Listeria is busy multiplying.
And physically, what does it look like?
It's a short, gram-positive rod, no spores, but its movement is really key. At room temperature, it has this tumbling motility. It literally flips end over end.
But the real magic happens inside a human body. You call it a sneak.
It is the ultimate intracellular parasite. It actually wants to be eaten by our cells.
Wait, it wants to be eaten?
Yeah, it plays a different game. It gets phagocytosed by a macrophage, but before the cell can digest it, Listeria uses a toxin called Listeriolysin O to punch a hole in the phagosome.
So it breaks out of the jail cell before the executioner arrives.
Exactly. It escapes into the cytoplasm where it's safe from antibodies, surrounded by nutrients.
But it can't just stay in one cell.
No, it needs to spread, and this is where it gets really cool. It hijacks the host cell's own actin cytoskeleton.
This is the actin rocket part.
It is the coolest mechanism. It gathers actin filaments at one end and polymerizes them to create a comet tail. It then uses the force from this growing tail to literally rocket itself right through the cell membrane and directly into the neighboring cell.
It pushes from the inside of one cell to the inside of the next.
Yes. It never has to go into the extracellular space where it would be exposed to antibodies.
That is some sci-fi horror stuff. So if it's never outside, antibodies can't touch it.
Exactly. Humoral immunity is useless here. You need your cell-mediated immunity, your T cells, to kill the infected cells.
So who's most at risk here?
Well, anyone with a weaker T cell response. So neonates, the elderly, the immunocompromised, and very, very importantly, pregnant women.
And for pregnant women, it's not just about them getting sick.
No. In the mother, it might just feel like the flu fever, chills.
Yeah.
But Listeria can cross the placenta.
What happens then?
It can lead to spontaneous abortion, stillbirth, or transmit to the fetus and cause neonatal meningitis. It's a leading cause of bacterial meningitis in newborns.
Which is why doctors are so strict about the no deli meat, no soft cheese rule during pregnancy.
That's exactly why. And for treatment, we use ampicillin. But here is a super high-yield pearl. Listeria is naturally resistant to cephalosporins.
Yeah, it feels like a huge trap.
It is. If you have a meningitis case and you blindly treat with ceftriaxone, you will miss Listeria. You have to add ampicillin if the patient is in a high-risk group.
Good to know. Okay, we've covered the big three. Let's do a quick rapid-fire round for the other rods mentioned. First up, Corynebacterium.
Anaerobic, lives on the skin. It loves to eat the oil your skin produces. It's the main culprit in acne vulgaris.
So pimples.
Pimples can also infect artificial joints, but acne is its claim to fame.
Next, Lactobacillus. This one sounds friendly.
Mostly is. It's the good guy of the vagina and mucous membranes. It produces lactic acid, keeps the pH low, which prevents other pathogens from taking over.
But there's a downside.
In the mouth, that same acid production contributes to dental caries. Cavities.
And finally, Erysipelotheryx.
This is an occupational hazard. It's a rod found in animals. Butchers or fishermen can get a skin infection called erysipeloid if they get a cut while handling meat.
Which is different from erysipelas.
Very different. Erysipelas is strep. This is a localized, painful, purplish swelling on the finger or hand.
Okay, that was a sprint. Let's take a breath and recap. What are the 3 things our listener absolutely needs to take away from this?
Number 1, Corynebacterium diphtheria. Remember the Chinese characters in the pseudomembrane, and mechanistically that AB toxin hitting EF2 to stop protein synthesis?
Number 2.
Bacillus anthracis. It's the spore former with that unique protein capsule. Watch for the black eschar on the skin or the widened mediastinum on a chest x-ray.
And number 3.
Listeria monocytogenes. It breaks the rules. Grows in the fridge, tumbles, and uses those actin rockets to shoot from cell to cell. Huge risk for pregnancy and newborns.
So what does this all mean for us today? What is the final thought?
You know, what's really sobering is that as we see vaccination rates decline in some areas, we run a real risk of seeing the strangler diphtheria return to developed nations. The bacteria is still out there, just waiting for a gap in our armor.
Waiting for herd immunity to drop.
Exactly. And then looking at Listeria, it really challenges our traditional understanding of immunity. We tend to think antibodies equal protection. But Listeria shows us that if a bug is smart enough to just stay inside our cells, antibodies are useless. It forces us to appreciate just how complex our cellular defenses really are.
A good reminder that nature is clever, so we have to be cleverer.
Always.
Well, that wraps up our review of Chapter 10. Thank you for listening, and a warm thank you on behalf of the Last Minute Lecture team for tuning into this deep dive. Stay curious, wash your hands, and maybe cook that deli meat.